All right, welcome. This is BUS172 Information Economics and Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Fix the little header here. There we go. All right. So let's talk about the material and start going through that. But first, let's get started on a couple of housekeeping items. So if you didn't notice in the syllabus at the very top, on the upper right side, there's a link to the YouTube channel and playlist for this course. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel, and if you do that, when I upload new videos, you should see them there instantaneously. The UJA link is in iLearn on the left-hand side of the screen. Okay. Video content is exactly the same. The only difference would be the captioning and then the player features. So if you prefer, it's more of a, I guess, a matter of personal preference as to what you prefer. All right, so for this week's material, we're just going to go through chapters 1 and 2 briefly. And so you'll need the book, but all of the materials for the course are on Course Reserve through the library electronically, and you can find the link for that in iLearn. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's talk about information economics. So, well, first of all, this particular book, it is an older book, but there are really no other textbooks on the subject, which I guess by being an old book, it means it should be cheaper for you to get it. Make sure you have the other books as well, because your homework assignments are based on the other 2 books in the series, which, as a reminder, if you've forgotten them, they're in the syllabus, but the first one is Everything I Ever Needed to Know About Economics I Learned from Online Dating. Should be a fun book to read. And the second one is The Economics of Information Technology. This one's probably not as much fun to read, but it is short. All right. Oh, and by the way, this is my teaching assistant. So she's deciding to be shy, but this is my teaching assistant. Okay. So she'll be helping out in the course. All right, so let's talk about why do we want to study information economics. Okay, we live in an age of information. Everything we do today involves information, unless we're hiding under a rock. In that case, maybe not so much. But we are storing information at an immense rate. So to give you kind of a little bit of a perspective on this, I've got a computer behind me. It's not on at the moment because I have to fix it, but I've accumulated so much information that I have had to start backing it up to this thing because I'm running out of space in all these little hard drives that I have sitting around. I would do backups. There's just not enough space on them. So I'm backing up there, and I'm also backing up to the internet. But you know how it is, if the internet can be a little slow. So I'm backing up there first, and then that gets synced to the internet. But the idea being that we have tons of information out there, and it's growing at an alarming rate. Okay? So if we think about where information was in 2002, which was around the time the book was written, all the information that was new on print, film, magnetic, so basically computer storage or optical storage media, was about 5 exabytes. 5 exabytes was equivalent to all the words ever spoken by humans, or all the information in 37,000 libraries the size of the Library of Congress. Okay? And that information was growing by 1/3 each year. It's not uncommon these days for a single company to have potentially exabytes of data stored in their own networks and out in the cloud. So if you think about that, 5 exabytes 18 years ago was all the information. Okay? 5 exabytes today could be all the information for one company, potentially. I know myself that I have probably about 10 terabytes of data myself. And I'm just one human being. Okay? And no, it's not movies or anything like that. I don't have any of that kind of stuff. But I have 10 terabytes of data accumulated. Okay. Now, let's talk about some information in a bit different context. So We take information, we produce it, okay? And we store it, we can copy it, and we can trade or sell it, okay? So it's basically an economic good. And so if we look back to, I teach the e-commerce course as well. So if we think about from like an e-commerce perspective, information became a commodity that you could, a good that you could sell or rent out back in the mid 90s. So we started having information platforms that you could buy things on. And today we can buy information, we can sell information. We all subscribe to probably streaming services. That's a form of information that we use for entertainment, and we pay for that. That's worth something to us. The same thing with a music file. That's, having music, it's a type of information. That's something that we can buy or sell. And then same with access to newspapers and magazines and things like that. We don't physically use those anymore, most of us, but we might use our tablet to do the same thing. Okay. So it's an economic good. Maybe it's strange because it's generally not something that we can touch. But if you think about it, other than information, what other good can be kept and yet passed on at the same time to someone else? What other type of good cannot be destroyed? Yeah, I can lose my data, but I hopefully have a backup of it. And even if I don't have a backup of it, I might remember it in my mind. So that might be the case. Another thing is like the information in my brain, right? For example, or your brains. Right? That's a good that, at least with today's technology, who knows where things go in the future, but as of today, it's not like we can go and scan a human being and retrieve all the information out of their brain. Okay? So, information is a particularly interesting economic good. Okay? Economics is not just about money, though. Okay? So we can think about information as a form of good that we can think of in economic terms. Okay? Economists study the market. And so there's a market for information today. Okay? And so if we think about economics and information, the economics field is really all about information. Okay? Information is a good, and the market brings all the parts of that good together and helps us to determine the pricing of that information. Okay? Now, let's go on. Now, with respect to information, you can't obtain information from someone else without giving some other form of information. Okay? So there's an example in the book, and that was Lady Kunigan. Okay? So in that particular story, I guess you could call it, okay, she proved the absence of true love on her part. Okay? So when we observe something that alters the reality that's being observed, and so we can think of this in a similar manner to the uncertainty principle that we find in information economics. Okay? Now, information is of very strategic importance. So information's at the core of much of what happens in the real world, okay, as well as our problems. Okay? So when we go through this book and the material in this course, we're going to see examples of things such as, why do doctors not always tell the truth? Why don't we like it if a paper is mediocre? Why doesn't health insurance always work? And a number of other areas. So the field of information economics is something that's been studied around since the 1970s. Okay? And so it's pretty, reached some level of maturity. Okay? It's a relatively young field, but it has relevance in many contexts. So it's not a brand new field, but it's relatively young with respect to if you think about other forms of economics. Okay. One of the books we talk about, economics and information technology, is going to dive specifically into economics in the scheme of information technology systems, which are very prevalent these days. Okay. So now let's talk about the book in general. Okay, the first chapter is pretty easy to follow, but let me talk about this book and let me talk about a few other things related to this course. So number one, this is not a math course. I'm not focused on the mathematical aspects of the material in this course. So none of my test material will be on the mathematical formulas or anything like that. So, if you're not strong in math, don't worry about that. That's not something that I care about. I care more about your ability to understand the material in general, and for the test purposes, it will be a mix of the textbook and then the 2 supplemental books that we have. So you'll need to read all those materials. I envision the test to be a mix of multiple choice, maybe some short answer. Your homework assignments are going to be based on those 2 books over there, not even based in the textbook. And then your case study is going to be for you to apply the knowledge from all of the sources in the course. So it's not necessary for you to memorize formulas. That's not very important to me. Okay? But I want you to understand information economics by the end of the course. Okay? So this book is, well, it's one of the oddest books I've ever seen in terms of the formatting, but maybe that's because I'm looking at it on an iPad and a computer. I wasn't able to get my hands on a physical copy of it, but it's a book that talks about theory, but it also gives some practical application of the knowledge. And so it should introduce you to the concept of information economics. In particular, what's happened over the last 30 to 40 years of the information revolution. Okay? And so you kind of get an overview in the book, and there will be pieces where it deep dives a bit more. Okay? All right. So in terms of the book, let me just kind of go through. Chapter 2 is really just about how to read the book, so I don't think we need to go through it in this extravagant amount of detail here. But each chapter is going to have the same structure, so you're going to have an introduction where we get an overview of the material, and then how does that material relate to the other chapters in the book. Okay? Then there'll be a presentation of the main ideas. There will be theory. There will be some real-world applications of the theory. There will be a conclusion, and then you don't need to worry about the problem sets unless you want to do those, but they're not something that I'm going to grade. Okay? And then there are boxes throughout the course, and you would have seen a few of those examples earlier in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Okay? And those boxes are illustrations. Okay? Or they might be background information. Okay? And then at the end of each chapter, you can use the checklist to determine, whether you understand the different concepts in the chapter. So this particular book does not have a test available through the publisher. So when we get to the end, towards the end of the course, and I create the exam, I will give you an idea of what that exam is going to look like. Okay? But I will probably pull some examples to use for questions from the boxes throughout the book itself. Okay. All right. Let's see. In terms of the structure of the book and the material, part one, we're going to get into the introduction of information as an economic good, okay, and go into the valuation of information. And then we will shift gears in part two to talk about the aggregation of information that different individuals hold. Okay? So we'll talk about markets. We'll talk about how markets require communication between the agents of those markets. We'll talk about imperfect communications, failures that may occur in these marketplaces, and then observing the actions of others. Okay? And then in part three, we're going to talk about problems when the information is asymmetric. Okay? And then part four is very brief. We will just talk about the use of information within the individual for building identity and self-management. Okay? All right, so that wraps up chapter 2, which is the second piece. But I wanted to just take a couple minutes to just review the syllabus one more time, just in case there's any confusion about it. Okay, so first of all, make sure you read through the syllabus carefully. I'm going to post a new version tonight that has a couple of tweaks to dates of when things are due and whatnot. But aside from that, it's effectively the same thing. The Q&A session for, which I'm going to refer to as open office hours, that I'm working on deciding the timeframes for that. I should post that later this week, probably by the end of the day on Friday, and then you'll know what my office hours are starting next week. Okay. The UJA link again is an iLearn, and then the YouTube channel is in the syllabus on the top right. If you click on that, that should open the playlist for this course. And then if you want to get updates when videos are added, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. By the way, if you're interested, I post lectures for all of my other classes out there as well. So if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you might learn some other material other than this course that might be helpful to you in your career. Okay? As part of the open office hour sessions that I do, I will be doing an Ask Me Anything session at some point. And that's always popular for you to learn about careers and any questions you might have outside of the course material. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead. I've already shown you the materials. The textbook is, the ISBN is listed. The case study will be worth 30%, as I mentioned, the homework 20%, class participation 20%, and then the final exam is going to be worth 30%. Okay? Case study will be due towards the end, not the last week, but it will be towards the end. And I will be providing details probably around week 3, maybe week 4 on how to do that. Okay? Your homework assignments are on those 2 books I presented earlier, so make sure you do that. That's going to be slide presentation in either PowerPoint or PDF format. Okay? Anything else, you're not going to get credit. The discussions, make sure you're doing those. So those are going to be due in the even numbered weeks, 2, 4, 6, and 8. Okay, so make sure you do that. And make sure you do 1 original post that meets the minimum in the syllabus and do 2 other posts to other classmates. Okay? If you don't do all 3 of those, iLearn will not mark it for grading and you'll get a 0 on it. Okay? And it's not my fault if you didn't submit it. You've got to be a grown-up and actually submit it yourself, right? And then your final exam, it's going to be untimed, open note, open all your books. Okay? You have a week to complete it, and it will be due on the final exam date for this course. Okay? My late policies in the syllabus, please make sure you read it and understand it. I don't make exceptions. The only reason for makeup work would be for a medical emergency if you have the right type of documentation. Okay? And I always get asked about resubmissions. I no longer do that. Okay? So submit your best work the first time. The course schedule is in the syllabus. So this lecture that we had today is what is information economics. We're going to start next week on information, And you should start reading for next week the Economics of Information Technology book so you can use it for your homework. Okay? Your first assignment is due at the end of next week. That will be your discussion. Your first homework assignment will be due on the week 5. Okay? So you have a little bit of time to work on that homework assignment. So you do have some time to read that book. All right? If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.